It doesn't sound like we have a quorum, so I think we're sitting here until we do, right?
That's right.
But I see a lot of people on the.
No. Well, somebody's gonna have to tell me who's here because
No.
I still only see myself, so I don't know what's going on.
4, 5.
See, is Mike Rusher back with us?
I think 7 out of 8 are on.
Let's see, it looks like we have Suzanne. Mike was with us, but it looks like he's trying to log back in. And outside of that, we are just missing Ted then. So we do have a quorum, Hal, if you'd like to get started.
Okay, at 6:01 p.m. This is the January 2021 EAB meeting for the town of Apex. I'll start with a roll call. Hal's here. Katie?
Present.
John?
Present.
Suzanne?
Present.
Mike? Mike, are you there? Mary Lee?
Here.
Jessica?
Present.
Ted? Ted? So it sounds like we have 6 out of 8, which is a quorum. So guess we can move forward. The next item on the agenda is the approval of minutes from the last meeting. Did anybody have any comments or questions about that?
Thank you to Megan for working so hard on the minutes.
It's a team effort. Val started us off with that one.
Thanks to Val.
Oh.
I will make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second. We'll vote on that then. Hal will say aye. Katie?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Suzanne?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, can I vote on this, or would it be
Yeah, I don't
better
know
if
if you
I
can.
abstain?
I guess you can't. I don't know.
Okay,
I
I'll
know
abstain.
You were probably listening in though, right? So
I was, but not in an official capacity, so I don't know how comfortable I feel about officially voting on it. So with your permission, I would like to abstain.
Yeah, absolutely. Mike, are you on yet?
Yes, sir.
Do you have a vote on the minutes?
Aye.
Mary Lee?
Aye.
Jessica?
Aye.
Ted? Ted's not on. Okay. Well, it sounds like that passes with 1 abstaining, 1 no vote, and the rest positive. So announcements. Really, the only announcement, we had a little turnover on the board. Tim's position was not renewed. There is no person for this month to fill in that role. There is a person that is starting next month. I don't know anything about her yet in terms of what what her background is or anything like that. So we'll just have to wait and see. The other new person has replaced Laura. Is Suzanne. She's on the call. In just a minute, I'll give her a chance. I do want to thank both Laura and Tim for their efforts on the first year of the board. I think it was a challenging year to try to get our feet under us, and I appreciate both the work that both of them put in towards making it a fairly positive thing. So with that said, Suzanne, would you like to introduce yourself and kind of give a little bit about your background or interest or?
Sure, I can do that. So my name is Suzanne Mason. I've been living in Apex since 2005. And I was formerly on the tree cap last year. And then before that, I did the first Peak Academy that they did, the inaugural year. I was in that, and I'm a biologist by profession. I have an undergraduate degree in biology from Clemson University, and then a graduate degree in conservation genetics from UNC Charlotte. And I currently work for the North Carolina Natural Heritage Program as a database manager. So specifically, I maintain records for rare plants and animals. So where they are and how they're doing. And
Oh, I'm gonna like you.
and so I just have like both a general interest and sort of like just inherent interest in natural resource conservation. And so
Yeah, that sounds
why
like you're bringing a lot of technical know-how to the board. So I look forward to working with you.
Thank
Anybody
you.
else have anything to add on that, or any questions?
Welcome.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you.
Thank you.
Anything else before we move on to the next topic? Okay, without anything, not hearing any feedback on that. Pre-application meeting logistics. Katie and I had a meeting the other day with quite a few of the Apex staff to try to get a better understanding of exactly what our goal is during the application meetings with developers. And there's quite a bit of discussion and quite a bit of ideas on how to move forward with that. So, Katie, if you don't mind, I'll let you kind of take the lead on discussing what we did and what we are proposing to move forward with.
Sure, thanks. I'll speak for myself, but I might also be speaking for others when I say the last meeting was both really helpful and also a little bit confusing and frustrating. So that is why we met. We had one developer meeting that felt like a really healthy back and forth, and one developer meeting that felt like we proposed a diverse and diffuse list of suggestions that fell on only slightly more than deaf ears. So I think Hal and I felt like we wanted to figure out how we can be more productive than that, and how we can make sure that if we are giving a long list of suggestions, which is not really our preference, I don't think, but if we're giving a long list of suggestions, how does the developer know what our priorities are? And how are we providing value to the town council so that when they are reviewing a rezoning and deciding on how to vote, they have an idea what our goals were and what our priorities were. So I'm really grateful. I think Megan and Shelley and Jessica and Amanda really, I think, helped us come up with some steps that I hope will be helpful, and we can talk through them. I'm sure that we can refine them. So the first step is when Megan receives the pre-applications, she's now going to send them on to us as she receives them. So we'll be receiving them earlier than we were before. And that will give us a chance, if any of us look at a pre-application and think that there is a major question we want to discuss or a major issue that we need more information on, we can now reply back to Megan with that question or issue, and she will compile them and she will forward them on to the developer before the meeting. So the hope is that then puts the developer in a position to really discuss with us and engage with us, because they already know what our questions might be, or at least some of them might be. And I think there's some things for us to discuss there about the timing of how all that happens. But I know that each of us has different expertise, and this enables us hopefully to bring that expertise forward at an earlier point in the timeline. And then hopefully we get better information from the developers. As part of Megan sending that to us, also when she or planning staff are sending along our suggested zoning conditions, which we've already done and which are pretty long, I think they're going to just push them a little more. I think they've probably already been pushing developers, but pushing them more to really look critically at that list and think about the things that they're willing to investigate, so that hopefully when we are actually having our meeting, we're able to feel like it is a healthy discussion back and forth. as part of that, Megan will make clear that things that they're willing to investigate are not binding. They're not official commitments, but there are things that they're willing to talk about, willing to look at. One thing that Hal and I discussed, and I think we can all discuss if this makes sense to us, is that because we're going to have information a little earlier and maybe have given thought to what our concerns are earlier, that perhaps before we get on the line with the developer, we just spend 5 or 10 minutes as a group discussing what are our priorities here, what are our concerns here, how can we be helpful in getting useful information that eventually helps the town council in their final decision. That would have to be really efficient, but I think that might be really helpful. And then should we get into a situation like we did last time where it felt like we just kept naming suggestions, one thing that we can do is if we have put forward a bunch of recommendations that it seems like it's maybe too many, we can put a note that goes forward to town council, like it follows the paperwork through the development process, that maybe says, okay, these are a wide variety of suggestions. We think X, Y, or Z are most important. Or we think if half of these or 75% of these are followed, that would be fantastic. It's just a way for us to, I think, make more clear what our goals might be. And then for us to be aware that when we vote on our recommendations, that's just voting on our recommendations, and it's voting on them being recorded by town staff and then following the project. I'm going to pause for a minute because Brett seems really stressed.
I'm not stressed. I just my comment is when we set up the committee, I didn't know how it'd work, and I think you guys were definitely harmed by 2020 and it not being in person, and so I think this kind of learning as we go is how it has to happen in this case. And I'm not frustrated. I think you guys are doing a great job. I think that list that you guys came up with, the suggestions, was really awesome. Things I didn't even think about. So I'm happy, and I think this interaction with you and staff to kind of streamline things is the way to go.
Okay. If you feel like we're not quite on track, please tell us, because we want to make sure that the information that comes forward to you is most helpful.
Yeah, I'm going to be mostly a hands-off kind of person around here. I kind of want to just answer questions, but yeah, if, like, for example, I don't know what staff thought about when they said, can we come back in the next meeting and do this? I don't know if that should have been prohibited necessarily. That was a comment I was thinking of at the time, but that if you get the things early enough, then that'll be less likely to happen. So I think I find when I'm doing reviewing of the things when I have a vote on them, I try to look at them as early as possible, because if I truly want something to change, I will often, as soon as I can, contact somebody and say, hey, I have a concern or whatever, and have a discussion about that. And I think having time to think about it and prioritize and think about the individual developments and what really matters for each one, because they're all going to be different, I think will be valuable. So I think this is some good changes you're making right here.
Okay, thank you. And then one thing that's related to this discussion that I think was really helpful that we learned from town staff is that when we are making a recommendation, it needs to be more specific than the recommendations we made in the last meeting. So if we're suggesting, say, native plants or certain types of trees or pet waste stations or signage, we need to be specific about how many, or specific about maybe perhaps where they would go, or that signage would be visible. And I think that's going to be hard to do at the stage at which we see these proposals, but I think we probably need to give thought to what language we can use that pushes developers in the right direction, without perhaps hamstringing them.
Katie, this is John. I think you hit a good point, that we hit these applications at the very beginning, and I think the last meeting sort of showed that we don't have a lot of, that they don't always have a lot of detail and plans for the specifics on the site, where what we're asking for are specifics. And I've been thinking about that since December, and I don't know whether maybe there's a way to adjust when we get involved with the application to where it's a little later in the process, or you know, I don't know. But that would clearly be easier for us for the specificity that we're asking for in these suggestions.
John,
Both
I
Hal and
concur.
I did raise that. We both share that concern. I think the feeling from town staff currently, and Brett can feel free to weigh in, is that we should continue at this stage, at least for the time being, see if we can improve the process, and then we can relook at that issue in the future.
That's definitely true from town staff's perspective, partly because we haven't had enough of these yet to actually learn how this is going to work clearly, and we need to give it a solid attempt to kind of feel our way through this. Whenever we have new members on a board or a new board that's created, there's kind of a learning process, and it takes some time for everybody to get used to the procedures, especially if we're kind of creating them as we go along. So we don't really want to take it to town council to request a change in where you all are in the position until we've given it a good solid run through. Just to comment on the specificity that staff was requesting from everyone isn't really necessarily you need to have 5. It's not along the lines of you have to have 5 pet waste stations. That's not necessarily what we're asking for. It's more in terms of maybe thinking in terms of ratios, things that can be a little bit more broadly applied depending on how the site is laid out, but at the same time won't overburden someone. So the pet waste station was one that was the example that we used in our discussion. And basically it was, if we think about it in terms of putting those where they'll have the most impact, then maybe we would want a condition that says something like 1 pet waste station shall be installed adjacent to each stormwater control measure that's accessible by sidewalk, because we have SCMs that get installed a lot of times where there's no sidewalk near them. People probably aren't walking their dogs next to those. So we probably don't need a condition. We probably don't need to put a dog waste station there. But the ones that people do walk their dogs next to, that sounds like a perfect opportunity. So it's, and we don't, depending on how someone lays it out and what the topography is, we may have 4 SCMs on a property that's the same size as another one, and they may have been able to do just 2. So thinking about it kind of in terms of ratios, or I'm sure that there are other ways to say that, but you don't have to say necessarily that there will be a minimum of 5 or a maximum of 14 or something like that. You can do that when it seems like it will fit. I don't want to discourage you from that, but you can also think of it in terms of something that can be applied a little more flexibly. Like, 75% of the trees that are planted on site shall be native species or something along those lines. That's all I have to say.
Does the town have ratios for their park in terms of pet waste stations or plantings of native species, or
actually,
can we apply that kind of logic to the developer?
I have no idea about the pet waste stations. I can ask that question and get you all an answer. As far as the native species go, to the best of my knowledge, we don't have anything like that at the moment. That's something that some of us on staff have been looking into, and may be approaching council with at some point. But at the moment, we don't have any restrictions on what the town plants as far as species. Now, all new projects for the town have to go through staff review, and the same technical review committee review that your developers are going through, and it follows largely the same process and everything. So we will regularly push for more native species, especially in the last, I've been here 7 years, 5 or 6 years, because it's a fairly easy thing to do. It doesn't cost very much more money to just swap out the different species for something native. Occasionally there's difficulty of getting them, just sourcing the material, the plant material. But we've kind of been implementing that without having a policy or a requirement at this point.
And I want to add to what Shelley said a little bit, as far as the council perspective is, we hear a lot from people saying, Apex's administrative hurdles to get development done is too high. And so I think it probably is high. I'm not sure that's a bad thing necessarily, but I don't think when talking about changing the order of things, I think we put you guys at the beginning because we were trying to minimize the administrative burden impact. And so I think I agree with Shelley that we need to kind of play this out for a little while, especially because you guys got delayed in doing this, to see if it needs to change. I think once we go through several of these, we'll kind of know if it needs to change or not. And then a little comment I had as far as this is my own personal philosophy is when I'm asking about things in the development that I'd like to see or changes I'd like them to make. We can't obviously mandate this stuff, but we can suggest. And I normally suggest. My suggestions often correlate with their impact as far as like if it's something really big and expensive, I'm only going to suggest one thing and that's it. And so if it's like pet waste stations, that one is fairly cheap, and so I'm kind of like, okay, well, you can add 5 or 6 of those would equal the one big thing. And so you may guess what I think about when you do the little powwow before meeting. If there are like major things, if the site really says we need a 100-year storm, or we want some really big environmental thing on the buildings, or whatever the thing is, and if it's like going to be expensive, you may want to narrow down your list because you'd be more likely to get some kind of commitment or some kind of they'll listen more if they're not putting dollars in their head saying, okay, well, they want 10 things that are going to be really expensive. No way. It's kind of like one thing that's expensive maybe we'll get through. So this is another suggestion I would have for how to proceed with them.
Katie, do you have any more? Katie, you there?
Sorry. I wonder if as a group we should just briefly discuss the timeline of how these steps would work. Megan's suggestion is we'll get the pre-apps pretty much as soon as she sees them. And then I think we would send any questions to her by about the Tuesday before the meeting. Does that sound reasonable to everyone? And then I think she would compile any questions or concerns that we have, send them to the developer. And I think right now the intention would be there would not be a written reply. There would just be an expectation that the developer is willing to discuss those things when we meet on Thursday. I think that's probably something we could discuss if people feel strongly about a written reply.
A question on that kind of advanced time that we're talking about. Like, could somebody help me understand? Like, when the pre-app comes in, is this going to give us like an extra week jump on it, or is it dependent on the applicant? Because like getting a head start on this before the meeting, I think is very important to what we want to do as a board. But how much lead time does that give us? I guess that's what I'm trying to nail down.
It does depend, Mike. So just so you know, it's required in order for a developer to attend an EAB meeting, they have to submit it within a week before that Thursday. So it's possible that I receive it within the week before the meeting prior. So it could be anywhere between 4 to 5 weeks that you receive the pre-app ahead of time. And then at the latest, it would be a week ahead of time.
And Megan, when you send the developer the list of questions or topics that we want to discuss with them, could you copy the board on that too, just so we, just so I know what other people are asking and everybody else knows what I'm asking and all that? I mean, it doesn't need to be Hal asked this, but we can see which way the wind's blowing that way.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a good idea.
Katie, anything else on that, or anybody else have any questions or comments?
I appreciate you guys vetting that out, Hal and Katie, I think, and staff, of course, too. I mean, this is just very, very helpful to the board, and I think you've captured a lot of the challenges that we encountered in the first few developer meetings, and we're grabbing it by the horns now. So much appreciated, guys.
Thanks.
All right. Anything else on this topic before we move on? Okay. With no comments there, we'll move on to the dark sky part of the agenda. I know some research was done on this. John, would you be willing to talk a little bit about the research you did? And Megan and Val, you free to chip in if you have additional information. So,
sure, I'll be glad to summarize it. I guess it was the November meeting. We had a suggestion that lighting fixtures that are dark sky friendly be included as part of our zoning conditions list. And we had a lot of discussion and not really, nobody really had a lot of information on it. So I looked into it. The report that we put together has been attached, but I'll summarize it. Like I said, the original proposal was that the lighting fixtures be dark sky friendly. And dark sky generally refers to light pollution, which is sky glow, light trespass, and glare. One thing I found is that there's no clear scientific evidence that outdoor lighting enhances public safety. Studies have been unable to establish a clear correlation between lighting and crime. So while individuals may consider themselves safer with more light, increased lighting does not seem to have a significant impact on the potential for crime, good or bad. Increased lighting can help criminals spot somebody easier, just as well as it can hide no lights can hide the criminal. In addition, research is linked bright light at night to suppressing melatonin, which can lead to sleep disorders, depression, and certain diseases. The American Medical Association's adopted guidelines on selecting LED lighting options for street lighting so that it will address issues with a person's ability to resolve spatial detail and the general adverse physical impacts caused by night light. In addition, a reduction of outdoor lighting and making it more efficient can result in energy savings. Reducing energy can decrease our carbon emissions in addition to reducing the estimated waste of up to 30%. Now, you can say whether 30% is a good number or not. I don't know, but I think it's principally the pollution effect of light being shown up into the night sky, as opposed to focused down on the ground where it's needed. In addition, light pollution can harm wildlife and limit the military's ability to conduct nighttime training. There are numerous dark sky state laws and municipal ordinance throughout the United States. They're designed to better enable and ensure safe and energy efficient lighting, preserve night sky views, minimize the impact on species disturbed by artificial light, as well as minimize the impact of light trespass and glare on others. The International Dark Sky Association has a community program guideline thing, and it's some of the things that Apex would have to do in order to qualify for that is attached to this report. It goes into right much detail, and I'm not sure there's anything in here that we can do as a board as far as what they're suggesting in here. But you know, that's sort of an idea of what they can do as far as decreasing light pollution. What I've got are some recommendations that this board adopts. First, that would modify the recommended zoning conditions without specific lights or manufacturers to add the following: shielded outdoor lighting, including street lighting that focuses lighting to the ground, lighting that minimizes the emission of blue light to reduce glare, lighting that's less than 3,000 K be used for outside installations, and indoor lighting be designed to be off when not in use, particularly in empty buildings. My second recommendation is that the board formally express support for and encourage efforts to modify the town's lighting ordinance to better reflect dark sky policies that do address light trespass, glare, and sky glow. It's my understanding in that meeting back in November that the town staff is in the process of looking at its lighting ordinances. So if we can, you know, express support and do whatever we can to help them out on that, I think that would be a good reflection on our part. I don't know, Megan, I don't know what else you got. Valerie, y'all got anything to add to what I said?
That was an exceptional summary, John. I think you pretty much covered it. To clarify, the town is considering an ordinance at this time, and we'll certainly let you know if we go through with that and how you might be of a support for as the board. But going forward, I would also like to support John's recommendation to add this to the list.
Yeah, I have a few questions. I guess in terms of like street lighting and stuff like that, I think there's some benefits outside of crime reduction and that kind of stuff in terms of, you know, just, you know, somebody jogging at night kind of thing and whether they're going to trip or not because there's a crack in the sidewalk and they don't see it or whatever. There's some safety, just general safety stuff that I think, you know, should be considered so we don't, you know, make lighting obsolete, you know, outdoor lighting obsolete or anything like that. I don't think that's in your recommendation, but, you know, I think it's something that should be considered. And then the indoor lighting, I'm really hesitant on that just because of enforceability. For one, you'd have to prove that a building is actually empty. You know, so I'm not sure. The indoor lighting, I have more trouble with. That seems like that might be an overreach, but that's just my opinion.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but I was kind of jumping to the assumption that we're talking about lighting that's controlled with motion sensors in the building on the inside. Is that the kind of, when you say, you know, if it's an empty building, have the lights off?
Yeah, in my mind, that's what I think That's what I think the recommendation would be. It would be more of an automatic turn-off thing, either motion or timing or whatever. I mean, state government's got buildings all over with motion sensor lighting, particularly in the bathrooms, which can be a pain sometimes, but it's something that they've been doing for quite a while now.
Would this be applied to residential and commercial?
No, I wasn't thinking that, but I'm not sure, John.
I don't. I think it's more attuned to a business use than residential. But I mean, there's a lot of motion sensitive outdoor lighting out there for residential consumption as well. Indoors, I mean, some people are going with that. Lights turn on when you enter a room, lights turn off with a lot of these smart gadgets, or the Internet of Things that everybody uses. My thinking is it was more designed it's more in tune for business use than residents, but
if you don't mind, just a couple of regulatory things to keep in mind. Sorry to be the person that has to do this. Building code actually already requires that all new office buildings have occupancy sensors. The only areas that I actually touched base with our building inspections department about this when I got it, just so I could make 100% sure I had the information right. The only areas that are not required to have occupancy sensors are emergency access areas or security areas, interior exit stairways, interior exit ramps and exit passageways, and emergency egress lighting that's normally off. So the kind of thing where you're in a movie theater and if the power goes off and they had those little emergency egress lights, those don't have to stay on. Occupancy sensor controls, so the motion sensor things that we were just talking about, actually have to be installed in classrooms, lecture rooms, conference rooms, copy print rooms, lounges, private offices. We had these installed in some of the new offices in Town Hall, and they are a pain. They're useful for cutting down on our electricity, but you do have to wave your arm at the light thing every so often if you're sitting there typing. Computer rooms, that kind of stuff. So that's already required, but that's for new buildings or new rooms in existing buildings, things that have to go through a building code review now. If you all wanted to offer something to encourage people to upfit in existing buildings, that might be something to think about. Whether it's a sticker or a designation that they could put on their window saying we're Apex Electric friendly or something like that. That's something to think about. But so that particular one is generally going to be covered for all office buildings. Now, I was not able to get the same information for all retail, but generally those lights do go off when the business closes down. And that's something I can look into for you if there are other non-residential building types that could benefit from that. The UDO also currently requires all commercial developments, apartments, or multifamily developments, and any signs to use what are called full cutoff lights. Those are the ones that you can't see the bulb from underneath. They basically have a full shield all the way around them. Lanterns are an example of something that is not full cutoff, or if you're driving down the highway or something and you see those old-fashioned sag lens bulbs where you can look at it from the side and it kind of droops down, those are also not full cutoff. We currently do not regulate what goes in the right-of-way, though. That's much harder to get involved with, especially since Town of Apex Electric doesn't actually have all of the electric service in the Town of Apex. We'd either have to work with Duke to get certain lights to not be offered any longer. And we'd also, and that could be tricky. It could be doable though, but it's just something to think about. And then we would also have to get our own electric department to not install anything that kind of shows that lens, that's not dark sky compatible. And then, sorry, my cat just jumped up and scared me. We actually don't have any regulations for single family homes, townhouses, or any kind of existing development that was built before the UDO. If an existing commercial development decides to upgrade part of their site, they have to submit what's called an exempt site plan, and we review what's being proposed to see where they can come into compliance with the UDO. There's a kind of key phrase that's involved there, though. It's the maximum extent reasonable and practicable. And it's because we can't require so much of someone that it becomes infeasible for them to ever upgrade their site. Otherwise, we end up with a whole bunch of rundown, crummy little sites that make the whole town kind of look shoddy. And we also just don't want that. We want people to feel like their businesses are appreciated and that the town wants to work with them, wants to make their sites better, but doesn't want to have so much regulatory control that they can't get things done, because that just frustrates people and kicks business out of the town. So, for example, if somebody's completely repaving their site, like Arby's did about 4 years ago, the one out on 55. At that same time, we suggested that they repaint their dumpster enclosure because the paint had started to peel and it was kind of looking a little run down. And we asked if they would be willing to replace the 2 lights on their sign to bring them into compliance with the town standard. Those were considered to be in keeping with the overall cost of the project they were already proposing, and got us, a couple steps closer to full compliance. So if you are wanting to encourage existing development to adopt standards like these, you have to find a way to either appeal to people's, since we don't have any regulatory authority over them until they redevelop, you have to either find a way to appeal to people's desire to do something good and get recognized for it. The sticker program type things do actually work really well, or the little thing where they get to say, electric friendly or whatever. Or you have to find some other kind of carrot to make that happen. So those are all of my fun busting comments for the moment.
Well, I guess, Shelley, it sounds to me like, except for retail, if somebody's looking to rezone a business site at a building, then the indoor lighting for that business is already covered by the UDO. Is that right?
It's actually covered by the North Carolina Building Code. We try not to overlap. Right. It adds too much in there, but it's actually covered by the building code. Okay, well then, and maybe what we need to do is maybe take that recommendation off. You could leave it on there, but try to determine if there's some kind of program to encourage people to redo it when they're renovating, or if they're trying to get more word of mouth for their business type of thing. But it's not something. It is something that's already required for new stuff. So probably the most traction the town is going to have as far as updating our requirements would be by creating a program of some kind that encouraged redevelop or existing development to adopt those standards. I live in Durham, so I'm familiar with some of their things. I have a house that's 30 years old, and we had to replace all of our toilets recently. And I have absolutely no interest in paying a high water bill, so we went and got high efficiency toilets. And I would have done that anyway, but it was great that Durham gave me $300 back, $100 for each of my toilets. So, it was a one-page thing that I filled out online, and they just kept crediting it. So I didn't actually have to pay a water bill for a year, which was kind of nice, until I forgot that I had a water bill the month that I had to pay it. But I'm not saying that the town needs to spend money or create necessarily. I'm not taking it off the list, off the possibilities either, but I'm saying that a program that gives people some kind of recognition, even if it's something relatively small, can have a lot of impact. It was just an example.
That's a good idea.
And Shelley, there is an environmental award or some sort we created that's been awarded a couple times now, I think.
That's
The
true.
Environmental
There is.
Stewardship Award.
Yeah.
I knew Megan would know what it was called.
We only had a couple though, so we probably can. This could be maybe tied in a little bit to that. I'm not sure that was part of the. This was part of the criteria or not, but that might be another suggestion too.
There's also a running list of community education initiatives for the board that were kind of left over after this list, just for educational purposes. So I have that running list, and this is definitely something that I can include there if interested.
So in keeping with sort of the whole goal of increasing dark skies, isn't it sort of a low-hanging fruit for the town with the fixtures that it maintains to sort of set the standard and by example start switching theirs over with the explicit intent and maybe sort of PR that this is what we're doing, this is important to the town. We also would like developers and retail to follow our lead, sort of be the example. Recognizing that they don't, own all the fixtures, but a significant number of them certainly do have the Apex tags on them as you go about town. Just a thought that the town maybe should be the leader.
That's definitely something that can be worked on and discussed. I don't think that's a problem. I think that it will just require some organization within the town. It would also probably require town council to make a directive. Not necessarily require. The departments do adopt a number of policies in this vein, with town council's blessing, but not with them specifically necessarily having to say, you will do this. But sometimes that does help. We really want to see X and Y, and then the departments will go out and do it. So if that's I would say that that's something definitely within this board's purview to make a recommendation that town council or that the town of Apex adopt all dark sky standards, if that's what you want to do.
I like the recommendations that John made. I'm more hesitant to say all dark sky standards because I don't really know what all of their standards are. But the ones that John listed, I think, seem reasonable, and I could be encouraged to support at least the recommendations 1A through C on the list. The indoor lighting one, that's if it's already a code, I don't know that we need to put it on there, but unless we retroactively apply it to existing buildings and give them some sort of carrot to make that happen. So does anybody have anything they want to propose on this in terms of any motions or anything like that? I mean, I think from my viewpoint, the one thing I would certainly think that putting this on the list of items that developers can consider, if it's not already on there, I think that would be something to consider.
Yeah, I had just really one comment and then a question on this. But I think piggybacking on Suzanne's comments, I think like if you look at John's recommendations on page 4, I feel like number 2, expressing support to the town to make efforts to modify the ordinances. If that were done before the EAB made any moves, I feel like the EAB might have a few more tools in its toolbox for movement on number 1, if that makes sense. And I don't think that's binding for like any of my decisions, because I feel like everything's pretty straightforward and in line right now. But I also wonder, my question on the report for John and Megan, and maybe even to Brett, if nobody has anything, but did y'all run across any information on on cost analysis in 2 different areas? And one would be, all things equal, if you're outfitting a parking lot with lighting, would dark sky certified fixtures increase cost, decrease cost? Part 1. And then part 2, did y'all run across of course energy efficiency is going to save money on the power bills, which is great, but I wonder how those 2 things balance out. And so if a developer or a mixed use community is going to face any cost changes through these recommendations, I think we would be better equipped to say, well, the power bill is going to go down and fixtures are roughly the same price. So we check that box, and I think that would help us be better advised on this. But that's the question. Have y'all run across any cost analysis?
Mike, I didn't see any real cost numbers other than, LED lighting is more expensive than traditional lighting. I don't see how shielding light fixtures is gonna dramatically increase or change the cost for lighting in general. So I think you're looking at a higher upfront cost for the light itself, and then lower operating costs over the life of the bulb or light fixture.
I can say that this is Shelley again, sorry. In the last 3 years, practically every commercial development I've reviewed, with the exception of some very small ones, like mom and pops, but very small mom and pops, have all used LEDs.
Yeah.
Because the fixture is more expensive, but it's not dramatically more expensive. All commercial fixtures are going to be way more than a residential owner typically ever wants to conceive of. But the energy efficiency and the fact that they don't have to be replaced for 15 or 20 years is really a remarkable amount. They tend to, from what I've understood from Cree, we actually did a training with them a couple of years ago. Cree said that they tend to pay for themselves within the first couple of years. So they're far more efficient. They actually throw the light much more uniformly across the site, so you need fewer of them. So that's another way that they tend to pay for themselves. The only problem, and I love the concept, so I am not nitpicking out of a personal issue, is it's very difficult to find fixtures that have less than 3,000 Kelvin. So the lower the number, the warmer the light, the more yellow it is. The higher that number, the more blue it is. 3,000 is about what I can find from most fixtures when I'm working with developers, and I can give you if you'd like, I can show you a visual representation of what that looks like.
Yeah, I think that would be cool. And I asked because, my research on this on a granular level, you click through the Dark Skies Initiative's website and it shows you can link through to products that have the little sticker on it. And you go to Lowe's or Home Depot or any construction material providers. It seems like a small pool of those things. So I guess that's, and I agree, like the long-term benefit of cost is pretty common sense. I mean, to outfit with LEDs versus none, that totally makes sense. But I think if we were able to check a box on just the cost research, I think that would be advantageous to where we want to end up. That's kind of where I was going with it. So.
Completely understand. I've just shared my screen for a second. Yeah. And this just kind of gives you a visual representation of what we're talking about when we talk about Kelvin. This is actually the temperature that the LED produces, which is why it's measured as temperature. The first time I saw that was very confusing to me. So the bright blue lights that no one likes because they kind of hurt our eyes a little bit are closer to are between 4,500K and 6,500K. We don't allow, we have not updated our lighting ordinance yet to take these particular colors into consideration, but we have strongly requested on pretty much every lighting plan that we not see anything in excess of 3,500 or 40 or to 4,000 Kelvin. And generally speaking, our engineers and our applicants have been more than happy to concede with that. Generally, what happens the first time they submit is somebody's picked a lighting fixture that will work for them, but they haven't really looked at the details. And so when we say, hey, can we bump down this color temperature rating so that it's a little bit warmer and not quite so intensely cool white, they say, oh, yeah, we can do that. That's no problem. There are fewer fixtures that are in the 3,000 Kelvin range. There's plenty of them in the 3,500 Kelvin range, but that's still pretty bright white. I have not really found anything that's commercially available between 3,000 and 2,700. So I think 3,000 to 3,500 is going to be easier to find. I don't want to sway you as far as what you recommend, just letting you know the realities.
Yeah, one other comment is, really what we're telling them is what the initial light bulb that goes in the fixture is. Mm-hmm. When they come back to replace it, when it burns out, they're not going to be going to town council or, the planning department or anything to ask about what, they're just going to buy a light bulb and stick it in there.
Well, most commercial fixtures actually aren't light bulbs. They're little tiny individual LEDs, and they're rated for something like 500,000 hours. It's kind of crazy. So they actually have to replace the entire fixture if they're going to do that. But your point still stands. It'll probably be 10 years before they have to replace it, but at that time they might just pick something else.
Oh, does anybody think we should take action on any of the recommendations, or does anybody have any suggestions or any more comments?
Well, I really like the idea of us supporting the town in sort of being a leader in this for their own lighting fixtures, and also the idea that Shelley put forth with having a program, like a sticker, some kind of program. But I know that it's fully within like our ordinance, but I don't understand how we do that.
Well, I think we
make a special subcommittee to come up with a program. I'm not really sure like what the step forward is for that.
Well, we could certainly make a recommendation to town council that, that this be implemented. They could, town council could always push it back to us and say, sure, come up with it. here's your funding to buy stickers or whatever ends up happening on it. But that'd be one way to do it, is, just put it in our, we could make a motion on, recommending the town council take this up and, see where that goes.
We've also got the community outreach mandate that we haven't really looked at yet. And that was something I was going to talk about in open discussion. So, I mean, the sticker program, I think, is a good idea, but to me, that sort of belongs in that community outreach area. I mean, what I was focused on was something that would we could add to our recommended rezoning conditions, and then knowing that the town was looking at its lighting ordinances, have us formally express, support to them for that endeavor.
I think, I would be willing to go ahead and make a motion that we add your recommendation 1A through C to the suggested development list. In that, it may be very hard to find lighting less than 3,000 K, but it's just a suggestion. If they have a source and can do it and they want to do it, then that's great. If they don't, they can choose some, one of the other suggestions, and, we can work with them that way. But I would certainly be willing to support adding that to the list if it's not already on there.
Should we change it to 3,500, given what Shelley said about the availability of the fixtures?
Not to exceed 3,500, is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Right, lighting less than 3,500 instead of 3,000, so that we know there's actually a fixture that would meet that requirement.
To be clear, there still are fixtures that will meet John's previous requirement. They're just a little scarcer. I wasn't necessarily trying to say you needed to change it. I was just trying to let you know the availability is all. What you decide is entirely up to the board.
I mean, the research that AMA, is that who said, they state 3,000. I'm not sure, what their basis is on that, but I don't know. I kind of like pointing back to an existing standard or some research, so that when a developer says, where in the world did you come up with that we have something to point to. But I'd be up for, if somebody has a suggestion of 3,500, I'm not against that. I just don't know what it means in terms of how much bluer that light is.
I will second your motion to add 1A through C to the suggested zoning conditions list.
Okay. Well, we have a motion and a second, so I guess we can vote. I'll say yes. Katie?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Suzanne?
Aye.
Michael?
Aye.
Marilee?
Aye.
Jessica?
Aye.
And Ted, I'm assuming you haven't joined yet. Okay. Motion passes. And any more comments or questions or anything on dark sky before we move on?
Yeah, are we able to, were we also entertaining, like, formally expressing support to the town, to kind of couple with our modified zoning conditions list, or was that going to be done sometime later?
I think you can make that motion.
Anybody going to make a motion, or are we going to move on?
I'll move. I move that the Environmental Advisory Board expresses their support to the town for adopting dark sky practices in the course of their business, something like that.
Okay. I'll second it. Let's see. Sorry, I got to get up the right thing to have the list of people's names. Yeah, I'll say yes. Katie,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
Suzanne,
Aye.
Mike,
All right.
Marilyn,
Aye.
Jessica.
Aye.
Okay. That passes too. So Megan, I don't know how we get a note to town council or however we're going to do that, but we'll figure out some sort of, maybe you could draft the language and distribute to the board, make sure everybody's happy with the language, and then we'll send it to town council somehow. I'm not
Yeah,
sure
absolutely.
what the process is here. If somebody in the town knows, speak up and let us know when you figure that out. So anything else on dark sky? All right. Conservation subdivisions. I think Jessica was the lead board member in terms of doing research on this, along again with Megan and Val. Jessica, do you want to take the lead on talking about this?
Sure. I actually don't know the origin of why we wanted to look into conservation subdivisions, because I missed a couple of meetings when I was on like maternity leave, I guess. So I wasn't exactly sure what everyone wanted to know. So I did sort of like 101, like conservation subdivision 101. And I did not condense it into actionable recommendations like John did, which was really great for him to do that work for us. But basically, the recommendations that I listed for at the end of the report for the conservation subdivision summary were recommendations that sort of the main orchestrator, the originator of the idea of conservation subdivision. Those are the recommendations that he and his organizations make for municipalities who are interested in pursuing this or making this an option or making it an attractive option to developers. So I don't know that when we get to that recommendation section, it will necessarily be where we can make a motion on it. But anyway. So a conservation subdivision is basically it's a subdivision. It's a strategy to preserve as much open space, contiguous open communal space as possible. So in a development, instead of just having a little pocket of park here or there, it's really everything sort of on the edges. I mean, it can be set up different ways, but you often will see the development on the edges and in a large space conserved. And the some of the alleged some of the pros of conservation subdivisions is that you can have higher home values and reduced infrastructure costs, because everything's close to each other. It benefits wildlife because you are leaving a larger space undisturbed. It improves stormwater management. You can probably hear my children. It's not bedtime. Hopefully you're not hearing too much screaming in the background. I just realized with my headphones on, you probably hear more than I do. There's access to open space. So the folks who are living there have access to open space. And I've never purposefully visited a conservation subdivision because I didn't really know much about them before I did this. But I do realize that there was a development that I visited that must meet this requirement, or at least this idea. And it's very nice. It has like a town, like a small town feel, where the houses and the townhomes are close together. And then there was like a large sort of forest area that belonged to the development, and a shared farming, area, and a little pond, and they had like shared chickens in it. So I could see why you could have higher home values there, and just the benefit of having that communal space open and undisturbed. So the thing that I really spoke to me about when I was reading through the CSD sort of process is the components of the design phase, and that's something that's kind of different, I think, than how traditionally the developments go through. What we've seen basically, and a developer would provide a lot up front. And also the town officials get more involved at the beginning as well, walk the site, that kind of thing. So I don't know. Do you want me to go through the process? I guess I can. There's a 4-step process. You identify these conservation areas. So the primary conservation areas are kind of the areas that they would have to preserve anyway, like a wetland or a steep slope, that kind of thing. And then you identify secondary conservation areas, which is from 30 to 80% of the remaining buildable land. So it's a big chunk of the land. And then they would select the housing locations, and then they you connect the dots with streets and trails so that it's walkable. And then draw in the lot lines. So that's sort of the 4-step process. And the recommendation is in the municipal review and approval phase. The first phase of that is that the developer would develop a sketch plan, and that would be based on a site walk. And as part of the site walk, as part of the site walk, it's strongly recommended that local officials join on the site walk and walk the property after they receive the sketch plan, so they understand the layout of the property. And then this sketch plan stage is sort of it allows the applicants to submit something prior to putting a lot of effort and work into a preliminary plan. So it's a little bit like what we're doing with the EIB, so that they're not as reluctant to go back on a design because they've already put a lot of money and time and effort into developing the plan. So there are several CSDs in North Carolina, and there were some examples here. I don't know if folks sort of scrolled through that. And then there was a recommended ordinance in the document that and that was linked when I took up the assignment. And from that ordinance, I just pulled in this recommendation section, I pulled some of the sort of highlights, some of the big ticket sections of the recommended ordinance. And one would be establishing a density directly in zoning ordinances instead of indirectly. So, such as designating density as 3 units per acre in sewered areas or 2 acres per dwelling in unsewered areas instead of indirectly, such as through minimum lot sizes. And I don't know if our ordinance already does that or not. And then designate CSD as a permitted use in zoning ordinances so that it's easier to do this type of development, and classify conventional development uses in zoning ordinances to actively discourage them. I don't know that we want to necessarily recommend to the town that they do that, but this is a recommendation from the originator, the author of this type of development. And then the ordinance would have open space standards, including a minimum required open space of 50%, at least 50% of buildable land. Design standards that include, how to do your site analysis map, how to do the process steps that I sort of touched on earlier, dimension standards for the lot and setback, evaluation criteria for how much conservation you've done and how to sort of get credit for that, how to get credit for historical and archaeological features that you're conserving, navigational provision, sort of ways to give them credit for, or ways to evaluate how much they've conserved, what in those secondary conservation areas. Bonuses, and encourage additional open space by giving bonuses for if they go above that 50%. And then there's like a whole procedure for how you would do this. You would have the pre-application review, which we're sort of familiar with, and then you'd have that on-site visit with the sketch map, and then they would go on to make these additional, have a public information, and so on. There should be a requirement for existing resources and site analysis map that includes includes all of those things that they would be given credit for anyway, that they wouldn't be allowed to build on, like the wetlands and kind of the stuff that we would like to see, honestly, when we get a site map from a developer to make it easier for us to make recommendations. And then the site walk, a conceptual first layout document, and then the other recommendation, and they even recommend that this be put in the ordinance, is that these sketch plans be prepared by a landscape architect or physical planner rather than an engineer or somebody who doesn't really know what they need to know to fully develop to fully develop the lot with keeping those conservation areas as large as possible and then also making it livable. So I guess the complaint from the I think that's how Arendt, the author of this, is that these surveyors and engineers don't really take those things into consideration when they're making the documents. So that's just an overview. I probably won't be able to answer a ton of questions, but I'm more than happy to do further research if we want to look into specific sections or specific topics or ideas from the conservation development, from this topic, basically.
I'll just make a quick comment. I'm a big fan of green space. So, something like this is something that I think we should encourage if we can. But, the property values in this area are pretty high. So a lot of developers probably, want to put more houses rather than less. So I think we're going to have to offer some benefit to them, whether it's, the amount of land they're going to have to dedicate towards a park is reduced, or that they have a easier, time getting all the permits they need to develop it, or, it sounds like it would have to be a special zoning or something like that. The town council would need to create or something to make something like this work, but I'm not sure. I've never been to one of these or designed anything like this, so I don't know exactly how it would work. But it seems like we would have to give some sort of, we said it a lot in tonight's meeting, but some sort of carrot to the developers to consider doing something like this, other than, the items you listed there. But
I think, sorry.
I was just going to say, that's just a comment. I don't know whether it's true or not. I'm just, that's just kind of a thought I had. So thought I'd throw it out.
I think one of the things about this type of design is not necessarily that you end up with fewer lots, is just you arrange your lots more thoughtfully. So instead of perhaps the traditional windy subdivision streets that all connect to each other, you cluster that development at one portion of the area with the same number of houses as you would have had otherwise, and then you'd leave this other area for open space or green space.
I agree with Suzanne. That is the intent of this. Technically, the town's current ordinance has the ability to do this as is. We just don't have any, and I agree with you, carrot has been used a lot lately, but I don't really have a better term. We don't have any incentives, I suppose, to really encourage an alternative. So one, I just pulled up a visual that I just want to share with you really quickly. If I can find that on my screen. Here we go. So this is a presentation that was put together at New Hampshire a few years ago, but it just happened to be the best visual I could find. It's the same parcel of land, and the roads and the lot sizes are more spread out, as you can see, whereas the lot sizes are smaller here, but there's more open space. So there are a lot of great benefits that come with conservation subdivisions. There are some perceived, and this is purely a perception issue, perceived problems with them, though, that the planning department tends to run into on a regular basis. And this is purely a problem with the fact that we don't walk around with lot lines in our heads. It's the best way that I can think of to describe it. If you're looking at a map or at a plan and you can see the lot lines very clearly on the 100-acre parcel that you're looking at, and you can see where the preservation is happening, it's much easier to understand that when you're out on the site, but most people never see those. So one of the issues that conservation subdivisions run into, and I don't think it's fair to them, is that because they're generally clustered, that means they have the perception of increased density. And it looks to people when they're driving through like, oh, well, that's not a very rural way to live. Because we're all kind of used anymore to the idea that rural houses are on 3-acre lots or, 1-acre lots or something like that. But in smaller towns before the car, that wasn't always the case. Most people lived closer together and then had their farmland separately. But so this just gives you a visual idea of what that is. One of the major benefits to developers is actually that they have less infrastructure to put in, and infrastructure is extremely expensive. But we do, to Jessica's comment earlier, the UDO actually requires both a maximum units per acre. In the low density area, it's 1 to 3, but we also have a minimum lot size in a lot of those. So one way to encourage this kind of development, and one fairly small way, would be to get rid of that minimum lot size. That's an option.
So could I make a motion to forward this report to town council for consideration of possible amendments to the UDO?
Do you have particular amendments that you want them to consider, or is this more general?
Hey, Katie, before you do that, I just need to chime in here. I have a
Sure.
suggestion. So as you guys may know, the town's going through an affordable housing plan effort, and I'm seeing a lot of similarities here because land's very expensive in Apex. It's pricey to build here, like it's much of Wake County, and so it's hard for us to achieve affordable housing, especially ones that are based on area median income. And so the affordable housing plan has a suggestion, and it's not really detailed, but it says like there are incentives that the town maybe will offer, and we'll work those out to in exchange that they set aside, a certain percentage of the development for affordable housing. And so I think what this committee, before you suggest this, that I'm not sure what you're going to suggest. You can do whatever you want to on this board, and we'll try to go with it. But it maybe is look at what we're doing with that and say, okay, well, we need a pretty good conservation development, like you're talking about, and under certain criteria, and we'll do something similar to what we're thinking about doing or what we'll put into policy for affordable housing as the incentive to make it so it's viable financially for the developer. And I think there's a lot of similarities here. And I think that this town council will value this conservation type of development similarly to how they value, at least in not prioritizing them, but at least kind of in the same vein as what we were looking for affordable housing. But I think the key is it needs to be not just like adding a community garden in the middle of it, but really needs to be what we're seeing in these pictures and what this research is showing. It needs to be a legit conservation type development.
I have a question, and I don't know if anybody has the answer on this or if we need more research, but so if they put in one of these developments and then they have a certain section as the conservation part of it, how is that protected going forward? Is there some kind of contract between the HOA or whatever and the town, or is it just zoned differently that it can't be developed? Or
the easiest thing to do would be to use our current resource conservation area requirements. Well, those could be expanded, but to use that tool that we already have. And currently developments essentially north and east of 540 are required to provide 20% RCA, and that's undisturbed land. That's woods or creeks or streams, sometimes open fields, depending on if they've been left natural. If a site doesn't have any of the above, they can plant to a particular standard to create that, but they're not allowed to ever develop that. Basically, when the subdivision gets platted, they have to, and that's the map that, sorry, I'm not sure exactly how much of the process everyone knows, so if I sound like I'm explaining things too much, please bear with me, I apologize. But there's a plat that gets made, which is essentially a map that's drawn, and it divides up the land into smaller parcels, and it will get recorded with the Register of Deeds. It's the thing that makes up your lots. It also creates HOA common areas. And an HOA can be very complicated and have all kinds of rules, or they can just be there to maintain and pay the property taxes on common area. That's entirely up to the developer when they set it up and up to the people as they move forward. So what typically will happen is that areas in the 20% area will provide a 20% minimum. We regularly see that being exceeded. If you're outside of that section, so if you are west and south of 540, then you're required to provide 30% RCA for residential development, except for apartments, and 25% for commercial and apartments, or sorry, non-residential and apartments. There are some things in the UDO that you can do to get that reduced a little bit, but so those are the kind of criteria that we have at this point. And essentially once that's recorded, they're not allowed to clear it. They're not allowed to honestly do much of anything except take out trees that are about to fall in someone's house. And even that, they have to get someone who can put machinery outside of the RCA and reach in to take the tree out so that they're not damaging it. You could also, and this is one option, but is not necessarily a bad one. Suggest that they put that property under conservation easement. Now, conservation easements are trickier in the future. Now, the town wouldn't allow the RCA to be developed in unless the entire subdivision got redeveloped. And the hardest thing in the planning and development world to do is to redevelop an area that already has single family homes. It is, especially if you have a lot of them close together, coordinating with that many individual property owners is next. So generally speaking, we don't have any problems with that. If you wanted to make sure that it was truly kept for conservation, you could recommend a conservation easement. Essentially, that would mean that all of the development rights to the conserved area would be owned by a third party. So it would dramatically reduce any of their tax burden. Although, to be completely fair, it does RCA taxing anyway. I know that they draw it as a different parcel sometimes, but I don't know to what extent. But that's another option that would provide an additional layer of benefits on top of that, so that it would be both the town and a third-party conservation easement holder keeping an eye on those properties and making sure that they weren't developed.
I'd like to throw out real quick, based on Jessica's report, which I think is great, much appreciated. The 3 case studies in there, the one in Davidson had 42% open space, and that open space was managed by the HOA. Orange County example, that case study had 57% open space. That was managed by a third party, Triangle Land Conservancy. And then the Hickory example, 21% open space managed by Habitat for Humanity, which built that neighborhood. All wildly different examples, different case studies, but also all 3 of those had some significant town or county ordinance overhauls ahead of time before those went in. But I wonder, throughout the report, you see all these mentions of zoning conditions and ordinance changes. I'm genuinely asking this question just out of naivety, but I wonder if it would be worthwhile to move this over for comment to the Planning and Zoning Committee for the town and just get their feedback and or recommendations on it and sharpen it a little bit, or at least help us sharpen our ideas on it. So I think this could be very valuable, and that ties back into Councilman Gantz's comments about the direction that the town's going. But if it's appropriate, I would, make a motion to push it over to P&Z, their feedback. We'll see what the discussion looks like.
We have Katie's motion on the floor before we can take your motion, so.
I will happily withdraw my motion.
Okay. So can you define your motion again?
Yeah, I'd make a motion that we take Jessica's report pending any final updates and preparation to be submitted to the Planning and Zoning Committee for review and feedback to come back to us.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Yes, I'll say yes. Katie?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Suzanne?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Mary Lee?
Aye.
Jessica?
Aye.
So the motion passes, and hopefully we'll get some good feedback. Megan, I assume you know who can provide that, and maybe we can schedule some time on the agenda for next meeting or the meeting after, depending on how long it takes to get back some feedback on this.
Absolutely.
Jessica and John, thank you for your work that you put into that, and
Thank you.
Yeah.
Megan and Val, for your assistance on both of those. Is there anything else on conservation subdivisions before we move on?
I have one quick question simply about the motion. Are you asking to send it to the Planning Committee of Town Council, or are you asking to send it to Planning Board? See, it's fun stuff.
No, yeah, I'll speak to my intention there, and apologies for not outlining that. My intention with the motion was to send it to the volunteer board, not the town council.
Okay, so that would be going to Planning Board.
Yeah.
Okay, just double checking, that's all. Thank you.
If that requires a revote, if that was not the understanding of folks that voted in favor, I would be okay to redo that. But
would anybody like to revote based on this clarification? Okay, with nobody changing their initial vote, then we will say it passes unanimously and move on. Last chance on conservation before we move on to open discussion. Okay. I have at least one item on open discussion. During our time talking to Apex staff, it was mentioned that this time frame of 6 to 7:30 may not always be held. For instance, tonight, we're already past that. And so if we have a lot of developers, we will need to make enough time to get through all of them and give them a fair chance to discuss their project and get, discuss the recommendations and whatnot. So, I think, we'll have to figure out maybe a time to agree on or something like that we end it and start it back the next day if we have too much to do. I don't know, but looking, just providing some warning out there that we may be going late, or we may need to have additional meetings other than the once a month. So any questions or comments on that? Is anybody opposed to going later if the workload demands?
As long as we can have a potty break, that's all I need now.
Okay. All right. Well, that's the only thing I had on the open discussion part. Anybody else have something they would like to discuss?
Yes, Hal, I briefly mentioned it before. One of our mandates is community outreach and education, and I don't want to get into any details tonight, particularly based on the time, but I think we need to start taking some steps to look into that. The landfill video that Megan put out was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Did not know we had that much of a power plant over there. So I think that's definitely something that folks might want to be educated on.
Yeah.
Yep, I agree. We could certainly send ideas to Megan in terms of community outreach via email so that at least we have a starting list of things to start talking about. I mean, just opening up the floor, I think we're going to get a wide and vast array of ideas all at once. If we can maybe organize it and, through sending, getting initial ideas out on, on a piece of paper maybe, and then plan during the meeting to talk about it. Maybe that'll make it a little bit more efficient anyway. I don't know.
Yeah.
What I can do tomorrow is, along with sending you all the 2 pre-applications that I've received so far for the next meeting, is include the running list that we have currently.
Okay. Yep, that sounds good. Anything else?
I just had a question because I am new. How concrete or amenable were you all thinking of being to reviewing the list of zoning recommendations? Like, were you planning on reviewing it and saying these things are working, nobody is picking these things, or maybe these things were not a good idea, or here are some other things?
We've only gone through 3 developers so far with it, and so we've gotten no feedback on what is actually taking place when they've gone before town council at this point. We did take several meetings and, putting this list together. I'm not against adding anything to the list at any time or taking things off the list if there's a reason. At any time, we just need to make time to talk about what that would be. And
Okay.
I'm not against it. I'm just it just depends on how many developers we got to make it through before, if we have 6 developers next week, then we're not going to base, I'm going to try not to put too much else on the agenda, I guess. But
Sure.
if we have a lot of time like we did tonight, certainly we could put that as an agenda item. We've kind of had an open agenda item kind of thing where any board member who wants to bring something up, there's 2 ways to do it. One is to send Megan an email and she'll get it on the agenda if time allows, and if it doesn't, it just gets it'll get pushed back to the next meeting, but we'll get to it. And then we also have this open discussion where if we do finish early or whatever, that different things like this can be brought up. So that's how we've done it so far. We're certainly open to suggestions if somebody has a recommendation that doesn't fall in line with what we've been doing.
Okay, thank you.
Would you all like it if I let you know when the items that you've reviewed, the developments, have been submitted and when they've gone to council and what the result was?
Yes.
If nothing else, I can send the information to Megan and we can make it available to you as an email.
I think
that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Then just to let you know, one of the first project we looked at last month, I keep wanting to say last week, but it's been longer than that. The Abbey Spring development next to Walgreens, between Walgreens and the post office, submitted this month. Staff is finishing up our review now. They did include the conditions and topics that you all recommended in their rezoning. They weren't phrased as enforceable conditions per se, so we're working with them on the language for that. But I feel confident the language we arrive at with them will meet the intent of all the items that they committed to.
Great.
The other one has not yet submitted.
Does anybody else have anything on open discussion? Well, I'm not getting any feedback. I'll go ahead and make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All right. Hal, aye. Katie?
Aye.
John?
Aye.
Suzanne?
Aye.
Mike?
Aye.
Mary Lee?
Aye.
Jessica?
Aye.
Great. Thanks everybody for everything, including town staff. We appreciate all your help and everything you contribute to this. So thanks a lot and have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.